Hello and welcome to the second edition of the NB Update, brought to you by the NB Media Co-op. I'm David Gordon-Koch. Coming up on this edition of the show, the family of Skyler Sappier is fighting for justice after the 28-year-old Wolastoqewiyik man caught COVID-19 in jail and died in hospital. At Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, a group of climate activists has published a report taking issue with a new Energy Institute sponsored by Irving Oil. And an Indigenous-led group has released more than 800 mature Atlantic salmon into the Petitcodiac watershed during a single week in October as part of efforts to rescue the migratory fish from extinction. We'll have details on those stories in a moment, right after these news and information briefs. The city of Fredericton plans to change its paratransit service from public to private management. That's according to the Canadian Union of Public Employees, or CUPE. Paratransit is a public transportation service for people with disabilities. The change is part of the city's new operating budget. If Fredericton City Council votes to approve that budget at an upcoming meeting, the service will no longer use CUPE members as drivers. The service is currently staffed by 2 CUPE bus drivers who are expected to be redeployed within the public transit system. But many details about the city's privatization move remain unknown, including the name of the company taking over the service. The city told CUPE the company is based in Western Canada and would use its own workers. CUPE believes it's unlikely the drivers hired to replace its members will be unionized if the privatization goes ahead. The NB Media Co-op has reached out to the city of Fredericton for details. Students rallied in Fredericton for free education on Wednesday, November 8th. The rally was part of demonstrations across the country organized by the Canadian Federation of Students. A group of campaigners spoke to the NB Media Co-op ahead of that protest.
If you have that free tuition in place, that can be a goal and a reform that once being won is really, really difficult to remove. And that's the hope behind that.
Guatemalan activist Neqotkuk was in Fredericton recently as part of a speaking tour. The Maya Cachiquel activist and coffee grower has endured threats on his life for his work on land reform. During his talk in Fredericton, Huracan stressed that Canadians need to continue to help Guatemalan activists denounce what is happening in the Central American country, including assassinations and forced evictions of people from their lands. At a protest in the provincial capital, Palestine Solidarity protesters called for a ceasefire, an end to the siege of Gaza, and for Canada to stop supporting Israel. The protest on November 4th was among more than 30 expected in cities across Canada, organized by the Palestinian Youth Movement.
We have really just one thing we want to say, one demand is to just cease fire. That's the main demand we have, to stop the indiscriminate killing of civilians in the Gaza Strip, and of course end the siege, but mainly just to cease fire because it's getting out of hand and it's getting pretty horrific. And a lot of people here have roots within Gaza, and that's why they're very passionate about the cause.
For more details on those stories and much more, go to our website, nbmediacoop.org. We go now to a report from an Ivy League university where students are raising questions about a new energy institute sponsored by Irving Oil. At Dartmouth College, the Ivy League University in New Hampshire, a group of student climate activists called Fossil Free Dartmouth has just published a report titled Investigating Irving. The report takes issue with the Arthur Irving Institute for Energy and Society, a new facility named after the owner of Irving Oil, which operates Canada's largest refinery right here in New Brunswick. The report raises questions about greenwashing and the potential undermining of academic credibility. Dartmouth College established the institute with money from Irving Oil, Arthur Irving, his wife Sandra Irving, their daughter Sarah Irving, and the Arthur L. Irving Family Foundation. The report from Fossil Free Dartmouth states that 1/3 of the institute's advisory board works with the fossil fuel industry, either directly or indirectly. Its members include Sandra Irving, Sarah Irving, Irving Oil President Ian Whitcomb, and ExxonMobil Global Brand Manager Abigail Rogers. The report calls for Irving Oil and ExxonMobil reps to be removed from the board. It also calls for the building to be renamed and for the college to implement a policy rejecting funds from fossil fuel companies, among other demands. For more on this story, I'm speaking to Maya Bovino and Noor Bukhari, who are members of Fossil Free Dartmouth. They're also co-authors of the report Investigating Irving with Kate Yo. Thank you for joining the NB Media Co-op today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
One thing I would clarify is that in addition to the funders you mentioned, the Institute was funded by a variety of other sources as well. So ultimately, I believe the funding from the Irving family and Irving Family Foundation and the Irving Oil Company was about half of the total amount.
And your research in this 30-page report involved more than 30 interviews with faculty, students, alumni, and staff about the Irving Institute, including the faculty involved in the Energy Institute Task Force and the executive director of the Irving Institute. The report states that Dartmouth is complicit in greenwashing. Could you explain briefly what you mean by greenwashing and how it's taking place in this case, in your view?
I'm happy to start with that one. So greenwashing essentially refers to any kind of PR effort to encourage the public to think of a company that's oftentimes a polluting company as more socially responsible and more sustainable than it is in reality. So specifically at the Irving Institute, how we see that operating is that, you know, by having a name, having essentially the sustainability hub on Dartmouth's campus be named after an oil company, the Irving Oil Company, that really gives the impression that Irving Oil is contributing to new research to accelerate the energy transition. And it gives this name to all of the work that we're doing here at Dartmouth for sustainability, ultimately gets accredited to the Irving Oil Company itself, when in reality, that contrasts starkly with what the Irving Oil Company is doing for transitioning away from fossil fuels, which when you look into their actual actions is they do not currently have a plan to transition their business model away from oil, and they are doubling down essentially on oil production while also explicitly lobbying against efforts to for Canada to regulate emissions.
And also, like, I don't think up until this report, like, I don't get that many students who are completely aware that Irving Oil is like an oil company. So that connection isn't made like very clear in students' head. And so like when they talk about like the sustainability hub and they keep associating it with Irving, one of like my big concerns was that they don't really know like what transaction Dartmouth is doing right now and what transaction, you know, they're engaging in when they engage with the Irving Institute.
Well, for more on this, I'm speaking to Aaron Stoider, professor of sociology, specializing in critical media studies at Mount Allison University. Thanks for joining the NB Media Co-op today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Professor Stoider, you're noted as a critic of the Irving family's political and economic power. Do you see the Arthur Irving Institute for Energy and Society as an example of greenwashing?
Yeah, I certainly do. I see the way that this donation to make them part of academia and to be funding research and cultivate student engagement, while also having a very overt agenda for pursuing, you know, sort of profits through the oil industry, is very much intended to try to bring more people into their story and for them to be able to create a positive image and to kind of wrap themselves in a mantle of research and evidence and sort of the future of young students and sort of energy leadership to mask kind of the pretty dirty oil story that is where the wealth comes from.
Speaking of wealth, company owner Arthur Irving has a net worth currently estimated at $5.8 billion, according to Forbes magazine. His brother James K. Irving, who owns the conglomerate known as JDI, which includes trucking, forestry, shipbuilding, frozen foods, and other business sectors, has a net worth estimated at $5.4 billion. That puts them among the richest people in the world. The Irvings, of course, are also known for their philanthropy here in New Brunswick. It's commonplace to see the Irving name associated with their donations. Examples include the Irving Ambulatory Care Center at the Moncton Hospital, sponsored by Robert Irving, another member of the Irving family dynasty. St. Thomas University in Fredericton recently announced new scholarships funded by Irving Oil and the Arthur L. Irving Family Foundation. The list really goes on. What's the role of this kind of philanthropy in society, in your view?
Well, it's certainly a benefit. Obviously, these are good things to have money coming from wealthy, organizations in areas of need. And you definitely don't want to say, we don't want your money, but they use this intentionally in order to kind of create a positive association with them, and then to kind of marginalize criticisms of them, to sort of undermine movements that would question or have inquiries about the nature of the industries that they're in, the amount of wealth that they're able to accumulate without perhaps paying their due taxes, the sort of long-term lifetime consequences of the industries that they're in for people's health or for the environment. If the story then becomes about the very nice thing that they donated to, if though a fair taxation system could have easily paid for all of those things and many more. And if they also didn't have a monopoly on the sector, there would be dozens more entrepreneurs who would be in the sector who would also be able to contribute to philanthropy. But they are very against having competitors flourish in any of their fields of dominance. And so they then get to be the one who's the only one with the amount of wealth to create the largesse. And it is very distracting. It's hard to raise a critique about them when other people will say, well, but look at all the nice things they did. Well, yes, they did do those nice things, but that doesn't mitigate the harm that they've done. It is certainly beneficial to them to, kind of want to put this good news story out. And many philanthropic organizations will actually spend more on promoting all the good things they do than maybe even actually spending money on good things. It's very important to them to have a brand with a positive identification, as opposed to one maybe connected to the truer cost of what their company's doing.
That was Professor Aaron Stoider of Mount Allison University, and before that, Dartmouth College students Maya Bovino and Noor Bukhari. You can hear their full interviews on our website or on YouTube at NB Media Co-op. We did reach out to Irving Oil, but the company did not respond to a request for comment. Dartmouth College provided a statement that said in part that faculty have independence in any research related to the Institute. This independence was stipulated by the founding gift agreement, according to the college. Next, we go to an update on the case of Skyler Sappier, the Wolastoqewiyik man who died of COVID-19 at the St. John Hospital last year, 2 days after being transferred from the St. John Regional Jail, where he became ill during a COVID-19 outbreak. In May of this year, the jury in a coroner's inquest found that Sappier, a father of two, died of natural causes. But the family says that Sappier suffered from medical neglect at the St. John Regional Correction Center, and they plan to launch legal action against the jail. Chief Ross Perley of Tobique First Nation has also renewed calls for an Indigenous-led inquiry into the systemic racism that he says is on full display in today's justice system. NB Media Co-operator Data Brenanta wrote an article about this story. In an interview, Data spoke about his experience attending the coroner's inquest alongside the family of Skyler Sappier. You describe one scene in the article from the hearings where Staff Sergeant Stéphane Pouliot gives his testimony by video conference. He's described in your article as an officer with access to all the correctional center's security video and records. And the family had a question specifically for him. Can you describe what happened?
So he was the one who conducted an internal investigation on the correctional institution surrounding Skyler Sappier's death. He's basically summing up the testimonies of the correctional officers, I would say, and gave some explanation on how the system works. He's also the one who has access to all the records and videos at the jail. So naturally, the family addressed that big questions to him. The family had heard from the community that after he died, that Skyler was not given the treatment he needed when he was at the jail, that he banged on the cell door asking for help and no one came. And I was there actually sitting behind the family when they handed the prosecutor the card with that questions. Prosecutor looked uneasy. His face was uneasy, and he came back to the family and told them something like, "Well, you know, they want to answer this, right? You know, like they will try to defend their institutions." But the family insisted that the question will be asked. I was actually surprised that he even said it. I thought if he thinks there's something that's being hidden, that it is his job to bring that out to the open, to the public. But the prosecutor did ask the questions, and Pulio responded that, the claim was unfounded because according to Pulio, the records didn't confirm it. But then again, no inmates were called to stand as a witness, which has raised suspicions that something is being hidden from the public.
And now, Data, you're working to raise awareness about the family's ongoing fight in the aftermath of this coroner's inquest. Briefly, how can people support the family?
Thank you. Yeah. So as I noted in the article, the family is raising funds to launch a lawsuit against the jail. Now, to me, a lawsuit on this case will be an opportunity to bring to light the problems, not to lay blame or persecute anyone or institution, but so that some sort of a resolution, a reform will come out of it. So it is an effort to create a better, safer, and more humane New Brunswick, or, to be more appropriate, Wabanaki, better Wabanagi. And the family is fundraising to cover lawyer fee for civil lawsuit. Now, people can help with that. That will be much appreciated, I'm sure, by the family. But I also invite people to do more than just giving money, and more importantly, to challenge themselves to do, what deeds they can do to express solidarity and correct the wrong in the system.
And that was NB Media Co-op writer Data Brainanta, who recently won the Brian Beaton Annual Prize in Journalism for Justice. Congratulations, Data. And you can read his full article on our website. The full interview is also on our YouTube channel. Next on the show, the NB Media Co-op checks in on an Indigenous-led effort to restore an endangered population of wild Atlantic salmon. So far, the results are promising, but the involvement of a major fish farming company raises questions about the role of aquaculture in the decline of wild Atlantic salmon. Here in Elgin, a village about 45 minutes outside of Moncton, people gathered on a beautiful fall day in October to release hundreds of mature salmon into the heart of the Petitcodiac River watershed. The inner Bay of Fundy population of Atlantic salmon has declined so much they're considered endangered. The salmon are being transferred from this container truck behind me into smaller containers in pickup trucks. One's pulling in right now as we speak. And later this afternoon, the fish will be released into the waterway a short distance from here, following a ceremony led by local Mi'kmaq elder. In the 1980s, wild salmon populations were hit by a significant decline throughout the Atlantic region, especially the inner Bay of Fundy population, which is listed as endangered under the Species at Risk Act. Blamu is the Mi'kmaq word for salmon. The relationship between wild Atlantic salmon and the indigenous people here in New Brunswick is profound. Amlamgug, or Fort Folly First Nation, is a Mi'kmaq community in southeast New Brunswick. It's at the forefront of an effort to restore the species of migratory fish.
The significance in the Fundy Salmon Recovery Program for my community of Amlamgug First Nation, or Fort Folly, is paramount. The salmon has always been a really important species to all of us as Mi'kmaq people in New Brunswick. And it just so happens that our population is the endangered one, so it's no longer a part of our traditional diet. It's not as prevalent as it should be in our way of life. Our salmon are the endangered salmon, the inner Bay of Fundy Atlantic salmon. So if we want to be able to fish salmon for our traditional diet, we have to go either to Miramichi or to Oxford, which is another Atlantic salmon bearing river.
This week we've returned 860 mature inner bay of Fundy Atlantic salmon off of the marine conservation farm that were reared there, but collected originally as juveniles from the Petitcodiac, and then reared to maturity at the marine conservation farm at Dark Harbor, Grand Manan. So on Wednesday, just the day before yesterday, 415 were brought to us by our partners at Cook's Aquaculture in a big transport, and Fort Follies trucks and Parks Canada's trucks picked those fish up from a staging area in smaller groups, and they were released at various release sites on the Petitcodiac River watershed.
And we've got 400 today alone.
Yeah, 415 today alone. Yeah.
Great. So far, these efforts appear to be successful as salmon returns have rebounded in 2 watersheds in Fundy National Park. People involved in the project also say they're making gains in the watershed of the Petitcodiac River, which runs through Moncton, New Brunswick's largest city. That river system used to yield about 20% of the inner bay of Fundy population of Atlantic salmon.
What this program does is we collect those juvenile salmon, they're called salmon smolts, as they're leaving the river to go to the ocean. We collect a portion of them and we take them to the world's first marine conservation farm on the island of Grand Manan. And really what we're doing is we're just protecting them, helping them get through that critical marine stage where we see a lot of mortality. And once they've grown to maturity, usually 1 to 2 years, as you've seen today, that those fish now go back to their river to spawn naturally. So we're trying to minimize the amount of handling and human intervention. We're really just trying to protect them during these critical stages and get them back in the river to spawn on their own.
At least one difficult question remains: what is killing salmon in their wild habitat? Along with overfishing, conservationists often point to habitat destruction due to forestry practices, the damming of rivers, and climate change. And some conservationists have long maintained that open net salmon farming also harms wild fish due to factors such as disease and pollution. That raises questions about one of the main partners in the Fundy Salmon Recovery Program, Cook Aquaculture. The 800 mature salmon that were released into the wild this month were raised at the Wild Salmon Marine Conservation Farm in Grand Manan. That's where the fish are exposed to wild ocean conditions to improve the likelihood they'll survive after they're released. The facility is run by Cook Aquaculture, part of a family-owned multinational group of companies. Cook operates under more than a dozen brands and has fish farming and harvesting sites in Canada and around the world. Industry officials dispute criticisms about fish farming, saying their methods are ecologically sound, and they take credit for applying specialized industry knowledge to the salmon restoration effort.
Marine salmon farming is in fact the most environmentally sustainable animal production on the planet. It has the lowest freshwater use, the lowest carbon emissions, and ocean aquaculture technology is without a doubt allowing us to help address the decline in wild Atlantic salmon stocks here in New Brunswick. It makes perfect sense for us that we continue to apply decades of science innovations to successfully manage the world's first marine conservation farm in Grand Manan.
And I guess, the big question with respect to the wild populations, or a big question, if I may, is what's killing the wild populations?
$1 million question. I think, for so long, there were so many factors, and I always say it's kind of death by 1,000 cuts. Historically, most of these rivers had dams on them. There was a causeway. There was all kinds in Moncton, right?
Yeah.
So there was, intense logging. There's industry. There was fishing. So it's hard to say if any one of those was the cause. It probably wasn't individually, but when you have one thing after another, what happens is those cumulative effects start to drive down that population. And with species like salmon, there's a tipping point, and once you go past that, it's hard to get over it, and that's when human intervention is needed to help them get back over that point so they can kind of recover on their own.
And you mentioned the facility at Grand Manan where the fish are reared.
Yep.
I know that that's run by Cook Aquaculture. Representatives from that group were here today, and of course, I think that some critics will say, this is one thing that may be harming fish in the Bay of Fundy is aquaculture with disease and whatnot, and yet Cook is integral to this project. So I don't know, what would you what's your take on that?
I mean, this is an industry that knows how to grow lots of fish, lots of salmon, and that is a critical part of this program. Is we need to grow lots of salmon. We need to rear these salmon to maturity, and so they have been an integral part of this program because they're helping innovate wild salmon rearing in the ocean. So this has never been done before. We're the first to try and rear these fish from smolt to adult and put them back in. And so yeah, we rely heavily on their expertise to progress that field, that science of how do we do this. And so yeah, they've been a big help in that.
Do you think that aquaculture could be harming wild salmon in the Bay of Fundy?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough question.
One thing for certain is that many critics of commercial fish farming operations want them removed from the sea altogether. Marine biologist Inka Maluski has called for a transition to closed containment aquaculture instead of open net pens. In an email, she welcomed any initiative to restore wild fish stocks, but said this species faces many, many challenges. It remains to be seen if the Fundy Salmon Recovery Program will get the kinds of results needed to restore the endangered plummet. And that's it for this edition of the NB Update from the NB Media Co-op. If you like our work, please consider subscribing to our free newsletter at nbmediacoop.org. You can also become a member of the cooperative and support us with a donation of any size, big or small. Thank you for tuning in today. For the NB Media Co-op, I'm David Gordon Koch.